Let's just start by having both of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the film.
Sure. So my name is Karen Coates, and I guess I'm a filmmaker now, but my background is in journalism and mostly in print journalism, although we kind of transitioned to video and filmmaking a few years ago, and have done a lot of my work reporting in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world for the last many years.
Yeah, and I'm Jerry Redfern, and work with Karen on pretty much everything. We do an awful lot together, I guess, is the main thing. And that's how the film came about the way that it did and why we partnered on it, because we kind of partner in most things. And for, like she said, most of the last 20 years, we've worked in Southeast Asia, working on stories dealing with human issues, human rights, food, things like that. And, you know, for most of the last 20 plus years, I've been a photojournalist. So I'm sort of the camera seeing eye person behind the film.
Wow. So can you tell us a little bit about Eternal Harvest for anyone who hasn't seen it yet?
So it is a documentary focusing on the leftovers of the US bombing campaign in Laos during the Vietnam War, which was the bombing campaign was secret at the time, and it's still something that many Americans don't know a lot about. For the most part, Laos is actually the most heavily bombed country on earth per capita. And at the end of war, there were an estimated 80 million bombs, unexploded bombs remaining in the soil, and most of them are still there today, making it extremely dangerous for people to live, work, farm. And the majority of the population, it's a rural country, so the majority of the population does work in agriculture. So having those bombs in places where you don't know, you can't predict whether a place is safe or not, just by looking at it. So it's a huge remaining problem.
And how did you said most Americans don't know the gravity of this problem. How did you come across this issue?
You know, I'd actually read, believe it or not, I'd first read about this like in junior high and high school. I went through a kick of reading a bunch of books about the Vietnam War, just because I wanted to know more about it. And of all things, there's a place in northern Laos called the Plain of Jars, which is this wide open high plain that's covered in these massive stone jars, which, I mean, when I say massive, I mean massive. They're like 3 to 4 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet around, and like carved out of granite type rock. And they date way back. And at the time, nobody knew what they were. They're this incredible mystery. And I always thought that sounds fascinating. I wanted to go see it. And in 1998, we were working in Cambodia, living in Phnom Penh. And for our first anniversary, I took us on a trip up to the Plain of Jars because I wanted to go see it. And we got up there and found that, yes, the jars were pretty amazing, but all around were these bomb remnants, all these remnants of war, you know, bits of airplanes, bits of bombs being sold as scrap on the open street in the middle of the town that we stayed in. And then several years later, we were living, we were just blown away by that, no pun intended. And several years later, we were living in northern Thailand and got an assignment from Archaeology magazine to do a story on the Plain of Jars, which was pretty cool. And this was like 2005, I think. Mm-hmm. And when we went there, we were there for a couple of weeks. And in the 2 weeks we were in this town called Sullivan in northern Laos, there were how many accidents?
More than 20 accidents just in those 2 weeks in that area, just in that area that we heard about.
Right. So, and we realized then that, you know, this story is obviously not being told well enough, hasn't been told well enough in the past. And we went ahead and decided at that point that we wanted to do a book and made a book called, of all things, Eternal Harvest, that came out about 8 years ago or so.
2013,
yeah. So did that, book came out, and yeah, that's kind of how it all began. That was the start of that particular snowball.
So why do you think more people aren't talking about this? I had never heard about this issue, and obviously to the people in Laos, it's an everyday obstacle and horror that they have to deal with. Why do you think people in the US are so unaware?
Well, At the time, again, it was a secret war. So Americans didn't know that it was happening when the bombings were occurring. And if you think about all of the things happening in the world today, and Laos it's a small country. It's not, we're hearing every day about Afghanistan and our militaries pull out from there, and the 20 years of war there. And that's sort of at the forefront of people's minds in terms of international relations. And it's a small country in Southeast Asia that isn't, and it's also fairly closed off. So I think, unless you have a reason to know about it or go there as an American, it's easy to grow up here and not know much about it because it's not taught in schools.
Right. So one of the main subjects in the film, Jim Harris, he is an American who's doing work to, detonate some of these bombs that have been left over in a controlled, safe way, help people clear their farmlands, clear their fields. How did you link up with him?
We met him in Laos when we were working on the book. And it was one of those things where, we would interview people and they're like, oh, have you met Jim? You have to talk to Jim. You have to talk to Jim. You have to meet Jim. So we did meet him. And it turns out that he is from a part of Wisconsin not too far from where I grew up. So we have all sorts of things in common.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty incredible that two people from Wisconsin end up in Laos together on this incredible mission.
Yeah, it really is. Considering all the people out there, it's that.
So when did you decide that you wanted to make a film? How long after the book was written?
I think it was about 2015, a couple of years maybe after the book came out. And it was after a visit with Jim at his home, Jim and Marty's home in Wisconsin. And I remember we were driving away and we're like, we should do a movie. I mean, this is this is movie material. And at that point too, especially in journalism, so many people were transitioning to video and film. And we thought it was also just another way to reach a different audience.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how long did this project take to complete?
I think a couple of months short of 136 years is what it felt like. I mean, for us as journalists, we're used to working on comparatively lickety-split deadlines, these turn around really quick. So we came up with the idea of doing the film in 2015, but there's a little bit of footage that's in the film from 2012 when we were in Laos to capture some film for a book trails we wanted to do. And we ended up meeting some people and doing some quick interviews that actually made it into the film. But I mean, truly, we started doing the planning for it in late 2016, and the first long shooting trip we did was in 2016, and then again in 2018.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Well, we're happy that you completed the film in time to show for our 12th annual festival.
Yeah, it's just been the two of us, so it's really been. There's just as anybody who makes a film knows, it's an awful lot of work, and then the fewer people you have doing it, the more work there is. So it just took a long time for us, for a story to get done, I think.
Yeah.
So this is both of your first films?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we've worked on much shorter videos for online publications, maybe 10 minutes or under, but nothing like this.
Yeah. What were the biggest challenges or unforeseen obstacles that you ran into making a feature-length documentary?
Logistics.
Yeah.
Getting from point A to point B in some of these really rural areas of Laos, that was extremely challenging at times too, because in a lot of places it wasn't like we could just rent a car and go there. Right. So we'd have to, figure out transportation, which and the infrastructure too, especially in a lot of these areas, is really difficult. Translation too. There were a lot of times when there just wasn't anybody to translate, but we'd try to film what we could and figure it out.
Muddle through and get full translations after the fact. So, I mean, I think,
yeah.
there weren't a lot of, well, most of the film was unexpected, let's put it that way, that an awful lot of, I guess what you call the best stuff in the film, we couldn't have planned in advance.
No.
And that we knew that that was going to happen because of all the work that we've done in Asia before. You figure out where you think the good situation is going to be, and you put yourself in the middle of it, and then kind of wait for it to happen. And I think that for the most part, that worked out. So as far as unexpected challenges, I wouldn't, the challenges were expected. We didn't know what they were going to be necessarily in advance, but we knew that they were going to be there. And I think that was actually probably a positive for us being able to get it done. So, we weren't surprised by the logistics. We weren't surprised by translation issues. We weren't surprised by, a bridge being washed out, or it's raining and you can't go do a thing. That's just part of the nature of doing work over there. So
You were ready for it.
I guess so. As ready as you could be.
So, there's so many scenes in the film where you're up close next to these controlled demolitions, and, these fields that have some really scary, big undetonated bombs in them. Were you ever afraid when you were filming? Did you ever feel fear?
At times when, there's one part in the film where there's a man who has some large bombs beneath his front porch. So a situation like that, that's pretty scary, because he at the time he thought they were safe, and they did not have fuses, but they were still dangerous. And you can almost see, I think, in his reaction as we were filming, as he's being told by the NGO we were with, that no, actually, these are still dangerous. You could see the look on his face as he's realizing, oh, maybe I shouldn't have these.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's one of the parts that really stuck with me watching the film.
Yeah, it stuck with us too. That was a real shock. That was, again, one of those sorts of situations where you couldn't have planned it in advance. We had no idea until about an hour or two before that this guy in his house existed, or that we'd go there, and we had no idea what we would find when we got there. So, and that's an awful lot of what you see in the film is that way. You're asking too about the danger and where we're scared and being up close. The first thing in doing stuff like this that we figured out early on is sacrificial GoPros.
Yeah.
And you put those close to the detonations when those things are happening. But the other thing is, actually, if you're with clearance workers, there's probably not a safe place to be in the country, because those people are extremely well trained, and last thing they want to do is get blown up as well. So they're very careful for themselves and for you. So when we were in those situations, we were with professionals who were looking out for the dangers there and making sure they didn't step in it, making sure we didn't step in it either. So
Yeah. So you probably, in some situations, were in the safest possible situation in Laos, which is terrifying. Really?
Yeah. I don't think that part's in the film exactly, but Jim's talked about in the past that some of the most dangerous things is, he goes into a village and starts talking to people before he's had the message to tell people, whatever you do, don't pick up bombs and bring them to me. And he'll regularly go in, and it's like the first time they've seen somebody show up to do clearance work. And of course, the first thing they do is pick up the bomb in their yard and bring it to him and say, well, will you take care of this? Which is the most dangerous possible thing that can happen for the most part. So.
But it happens that way because these are places where people haven't had the clearance that they need. So when someone does show up saying that we can help take care of this problem, it's like, oh, good, please get rid of this for me, because it's been, in our way and my family's way for too long.
You would think that clearances like this would be military grade, super high special equipment, troops on the ground, but it's just a bunch of people who care working together to clear this with the resources that they have.
Everybody that you saw working on clearance stuff, they're all actually very highly trained. And at some point, the guy we followed around, for the guy in the blue vest, we followed around for several days, and who was doing most of the demolition works. He's one of the most respected, highest trained demolitions experts in the country. I mean, you don't get much more professional than he is. And I think it's kind of you expect to see somebody dressed in a certain way and have certain levels of equipment, but they don't. But what's in their heads is as good as as good as the knowledge anybody has that's out there doing this sort of work.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an important note to that I want to put out there.
The other thing about it too is that there just isn't any, big specialized equipment for the most part that can deal with this sort of problem. When it comes down to it, it's one person with a metal detector just going back and forth like that. And they've tried, and in other parts of the world, there are places where other sorts of clearance operations work, but for many reasons in Laos, it doesn't, because of the terrain, because of the lack of infrastructure, because of the makeup of the soil, all sorts of reasons why specialized equipment doesn't work there. So it does end up looking very low tech.
Do you think that there is a role for the US government to send in their equipment or their army, or do you think that would just make things more complicated? I know that obviously the US isn't funding the way that they should be, but do you think that they could assist in other ways that they aren't?
I think the funding part is the most important thing. And, there's been a lot of discussion about this, whether the US should be sending a lot of people, but really in so many years have passed, this is a different country, and it is their land and their problem to deal with. And there are plenty of people in Laos who are trained to do this and would like to be trained to do this sort of work and in need of jobs too. So really, when it comes down to it, the money is the big thing that's needed and wanted.
I think, which isn't to say though that, they wouldn't appreciate, courtesy of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, America has, I think, the largest and best trained, as they call it here, EOD squads on the planet. We have more explosives demolitions people courtesy of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan than anywhere. And I think that if some of them were to want to do training in Laos, I think that would distinctly be appreciated. If they, want to give that sort of technical advice, which is often done and appreciated. I think that would be a positive.
I'll also say too that there are programs to help people who have been disabled by accidents, but we've also talked to families who have lost people, and then maybe it's the person who made the most money for the family, or there's a family in the film, they lost their daughter, and there's nobody to help people in that sort of situation to financially cover, say, funerals and those sorts of costs. But in that case, they were working on a coffee field, and they, certainly understandably don't want to go back to that field. So that's lost income too. And there aren't any programs set up really to help a lot of families in that kind of situation. And that definitely, I think, would be appreciated.
Yeah, that's definitely a need that needs to be filled. And that was going to be my next question, actually. What do you think America's responsibility is in caring for these people and dealing with the mess that was made so long ago?
I distinctly think that it is, as actually Marty Harris says in the film, this is America's mess, and America needs to clean it up with whatever it takes. If that's money to pay for clearance work for the Lao people to do, then that needs to be done. If it's the money it takes to send trainers over or train other people to be trainers, then that needs to be done. If it's money to families like those in the film who lost people and can no longer use their farms because they found US ordnance in their fields, I think those are payments that need to be made. And, as we show in the film again, I mean, there is money that's gone in. And if you step back and look at it, you think, oh, $300 million. But over 30 years, it's not enough to deal with the problem whatsoever. I mean, it's just not enough. It's really just scratching the surface.
I think there also needs to be a much larger conversation in our society about what responsibilities do we as a society have after war? Because it's very easy to end, well, not easy to end a war, but common to end a war, leave a war, and then there's not a whole lot discussed in the long term afterward. And we're talking about decades here, and they're still, dealing with the problems, but we're not having those conversations here.
Well, hopefully this film sparks those conversations.
Yeah, I hope so.
That would be
Yeah,
nice.
that's the goal.
Yes.
So has this film been released or screened in Laos at all? I'm wondering what the reception there has been.
It has not yet.
Okay.
You're the first.
Woo!
We don't really have a shot list. We don't know what the plot's going to be. We don't know how the film's going to turn out when we start, which goes for most of the way we do stories. We just put ourselves in a place where we're pretty sure a thing's going to happen and wait for it to happen, which is maybe not the most efficient way to get things done, but
Well, it certainly is effective in this film.
yeah, it works. It works in the end.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for talking with us. For anyone who hasn't seen it, Eternal Harvest is screening at the Chagrin Documentary Film Festival. Thank you so much, Karen and Jerry.
Thank you.
This is great.